council with the Historical Diving Society, and once again, we're located in the Avalon Diving History exhibit, located in Avalon on Catalina Island. Today, I'd like to talk a little bit about how diving entered popular culture. It's one of my favorite subjects regarding diving. It dates back to the early days, certainly of open circuit scuba, but it's a fun topic for me, and I get excited telling people about it. In the early days of diving, of course, mostly it was helmet diving and breath hold free divers that were getting into the water. But after World War II, open circuit scuba systems started making its way into the marketplace, and certainly the Cousteau Gagnon aqualungs made it into the United States marketplace in 1949, and by the early 50s, it really started to catch on. Prior to that, very few people really had any understanding of what was underneath the surface of the water. They didn't understand what was, life-wise, what was under there, and everything was drama. And it was certainly portrayed and picked up by popular culture, pop media, because they like to portray diving as this very risky, dangerous, high-stakes kind of business. And a lot of that stemmed from the fact that most of the people that were in the diving business as the upper ranks or most experienced divers were actually military divers who'd come out of World War II, and then later in the 50s came out of the combat unit divers from the Korean War. So those people came back from the war efforts as combat divers. They had the skill set that they naturally wanted to continue utilizing, and many of them gravitated into the new dive shop owners and new dive instructors at the time, and for the recreational sector. And of course, the portrayal was, a lot of that borrowed sort of culture from the military. A lot of spear guns, a lot of knives, a lot of drama, a lot of fighting underwater, and a lot of hose cutting, things like that. So television programs like Sea Hunt that aired in the late 50s, and certainly a lot of these movie posters and comic book covers and things like that. If you look at them, probably 90% of them have divers with knives in their hands, spear guns, fighting monsters, all kinds of drama and action underwater. And that's expected, I suppose, because that was the portrayal of what divers were really about. And it took some time before people realized that once you got in the water, not every dive was going to be a venture with fighting a shark, hand-to-hand combat, or that you had a giant octopus that was trying to attack you, all those kinds of things. It was the portrayal that reached out to the audience. Now, if you were a kid growing up in the 50s and 60s, that was it. That's what you were exposed to, all this kind of high-stakes drama. And of course, it was the kind of thing that drew people in. And how it affected the diving industry, one of the perfect examples was military divers. They had it just sort of beaten into them that, you didn't show up on the beach without your complement of combat tools. So you had a great big sort of machete-length knife attached to your thigh, and you were ready to go to work, right? And so when they came back and started teaching people to dive, naturally their students looked at their instructor and they saw the big dive knife on their thigh, and it's like, well, they wanted to emulate that. So the first thing they did when they went to outfit themselves with equipment, they wanted to have that big dive knife. Well, diving equipment manufacturers recognized the trend, and the first thing they started to do was manufacture larger and larger dive knives. And so throughout the 50s and 60s, that's all you saw was a great big dive knives. And it's interesting, and there's some of them up here on the wall that you can see examples of them. But it's really fascinating that today no one is making the large dive knife anymore. People have learned that once you got in the water that you weren't really doing battle with the animals underwater, and there wasn't really a need for a machete-length knife any longer. So most knives have reduced themselves down to a small, utilitarian tool that you can clip onto your BC, and you can pull it out and cut some line or trim off some tips of zip ties or something like that, and that's really sort of where that's gone. But I'm just fascinated by the imagery that was portrayed at that time about how these things, if you look at like the 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, classic Jules Verne tale, but the 1954 Disney movie, everybody had a spear gun, everybody had some kind of tool to fight the demons, and during the film there's a lot of that kind of portrayal. And in the Frogman series of comic books, every scene is high drama, high action. So how can you not love that that period of time in diving and how it sort of influenced the business. Well, anyway, I hope you enjoy it, and certainly look us up online at www.hds.org.